Welcome to part 3 of Shave 2 Weeks Off Your Next Project Schedule using WebORB Data Management. So that's it for the basic, simple CRUD. The essential point to bring out in the code is the role of this search result array collection. That when this function returns, it returns an empty array collection that is bindable, and that the data grid down here, here's our data grid, the data provider binds to the search result, so that when the search result is updated with the data from the operations, the data grid is automatically updated to reflect the results of the query. And that's the model view controller way of attaching the data to the model, or the data to the view. So there's one other thing I wanted to show in the find in this thing here is, let's look at the read method. Right? We've seen that it brings in one, or rather it looks up all of the products that have that same price. Let's look at the code for that, because there is one little tricky bit there. We find the price of the currently selected item, and then we call the method find by price on that string after converting the price to a string. Find by price. Think about that method for a minute. That's a method that's named after a property of the table, of the class created by the table. That's really a dynamic method. Okay, you've got find by price, another method of, or rather another property of the product object is name. You could have find by name. You could have find by price or name, find by price and name. Those methods are all created dynamically. One of the beauties of ActionScript is it is a dynamic language, like Scheme, for example. And so you can build these functions on the fly and call them in your code. And this use of them in data management is actually quite spiffy. So I'm not going to go into great details there. The dynamic methods are described in the documentation. One of the key things that makes that possible is if I look at this product class, you'll see that it's declared to be a dynamic class. Right? And that's what makes that dynamism of methods possible. Last thing I wanted to show on this example is client synchronization. So let me resize this screen to make it a bit smaller. Whoops, not that small. And then bring up another one. So to show client synchronization, I'm going to take the price of apples and change it to 7. And then when I update it, now watch apples over on this side, this other client here. When I hit update over here, by golly, gosh, it's nice when demos work. The apples price was changed over here to 7 as well. That was so cool. Let's do it the other way around. Let's take the apples price on this side and update it, and by golly, it changed over here to 9 as well. Now, WebORB can do that because WebORB not only has the data management functionality built in, it also has a messaging server built in, and it uses that messaging server functionality to let all the clients who are looking at that current data know that the data that they're looking at has changed, and it's changed in this way. So that's client synchronization, which can be a very thorny problem to solve on your own, but WebORB does it for you due to its built-in messaging functionality. So let's go back to PowerPoint for the summary. By using a specialist's implementation, you can solve these 3 well-known problems: the object relational mapping problem, transaction processing problem, and the client synchronization problem, and save time and benefit from a specialist's years of experience. Now, that specialist isn't me. The specialist is Mark, who's been doing this stuff since he was working on Sabre, the first major client-server shared real-time database access system. So, I mean, the guy's got decades of experience in this. And although these problems all have known solutions, you can shave 2 or more weeks off of your next project schedule using WebORB Data Management. And for more information, look later today on www.themidnightcoders.com. Go to our blog, and I'll have links off to all of this information. So our next webinar is how to brighten up your application with WebORB media streaming, and that's on Thursday, December 9th, at the much more congenial time of 3 in the afternoon rather than 9 in the morning my time. And with that, happy coding, and any other questions, Mark and I and Kathleen will be happy to answer. So fire away.
There was a question about the security. So generally speaking, all the generated code for the server side, specifically the data mappers, they are exposed as services. So whenever you work with data, whether it's fetching data or creating new records, updating records, or deleting records, those requests which are initiated from the client side are just plain remoting requests. So it is AMF over HTTP. Okay. The only difference in terms of the actual method of communication is for client synchronization, which could use either RTMP or polling. So going back to the basic CRUD, since everything is remoting, then the traditional mechanism of securing your remoting services with WebORB does apply with data management. So in other words, if you were to restrict access to a particular CRUD operation, either on a user role basis or restricting it by IP address or IP range, then all of those security constraints are applicable, and you can do it either on a per method basis, meaning restricting access to the methods fetching data or creating records, or you can do it at a class or package or namespace level. So the same way you would be securing your remoting services with WebORB, you would be securing your data mappers with data management. So that's kind of a high-level overview. Of course, the devil is in the details, and the details include essentially creating authentication and optionally authorization handler to restrict access to your data mappers.
Very good. Folks, please do feel free to answer that same poll question, which I have now up. That's a very good way for us to determine whether or not this webinar did you any good.
Okay, I would like to correct something on that poll as well. You probably only see, based on what you know right now, what is the chance of your recommending WebORB data. It looks like the title was kind of clipped off. We wanted to know what was the likelihood of your recommending WebORB Data Management for your next data management project. Also, in selecting your answers, the 0 to 19% should be very unlikely, and then the 80+ percent is very likely. So, so if you're very likely, please choose the 80% plus. Thank you.
Okay, and there is a question on whether there is an example for transaction/commit using distinct tables. In this webinar, Jim mentioned and showed an example of using a special class available through WebORB Data Management called Unit of Work. So Unit of Work, the way it works is it allows you to combine multiple CRUD requests into a single batch. When you use the Unit of Work class on the client side, you can add various active records which would need to be modified, updated, or deleted, or created into that Unit of Work instance. Whenever you commit that Unit of Work instance, all those operations, specifically creation, deletion, or modification, they go out to the server and are executed in the context of a single transaction. Meaning that if any one of them fails, WebORB will roll back the whole thing. So using the Unit of Work is how you would execute your transactions if you were to do multiple modifications to your database. So Fabio, I hope that answers your question, and if not, please ask any follow-on questions. All right, there is a question of if there's an example for relational mapping between tables for WebORB data management. So one of the core features and one of the most powerful features that WebORB data management has to offer is the ability to load related data for any particular entity. So for instance, if you have, let's say, in the example that Jim has shown, there is a account table, and there is a relationship. There is a foreign key between account and order. In other words, you can get a list of all the orders for any particular account. When the code is generated, there is we determine all the foreign keys and all the relations between various tables, and the generated code automatically includes properties which are lazily initialized that allow you to fetch related data for any particular entity. So for instance, once you retrieve an instance of order on the client side, then that instance will contain a property called related. I'm sorry, let's backtrack. Once you retrieve an instance of account, that account instance will contain a property called related orders. And then those orders are not loaded by default. You can instruct WebORB to load them by default, but out of the box they're not available. But once you call related orders on an instance of account, all those orders will automatically be fetched and delivered back to you on the client side. And you can actually navigate through the entire structure of your database using those related properties to fetch the data from the related tables. And it works from the way you consume those properties. It looks like it is an asynchronous invocation. So you basically say instance of account dot related orders. You actually get a collection right away. That collection is populated once the data arrives. You can customize and specify names for those properties using the management console. Whenever you select the table, there's going to be a properties sheet where you can specify the names for those related properties. So there is definitely support for relational mapping between tables. There is another question on whether you can expose non-WebORB DLLs. As far as WebORB is concerned, there is no such thing as a WebORB DLL. WebORB will work with any .NET assembly. So if you were to compile your class library, and regardless of what version of the .NET framework it is, starting from 2.0 all the way to 4.0, you can deploy that .NET assembly into an application where WebORB is running, and that would be an ASP.NET application, for example. And then all the classes from that assembly would be available as remoting services. So Jeff, hopefully that answers your question, and if not, please ask a follow-on question.
So for example, here, if you're seeing my screen again, I've got a list of .NET assemblies. I could, for example, let's see, go to some other sample application and remoting, and hello 0 server, bin, debug. All right, so there's a DLL. I will drop that into my WebORB folder. All right, so I'm going to take it from here to here, go back to here, update the list of deployed assemblies, and there it is. There is hello server.dll deployed into WebORB simply by dragging and dropping it into the right folder. And so from there I can test drive the various services and do all the things that you can do in WebORB. So yes, you can deploy just about any darn DLL you want, whether it is a .NET assembly or a Spring Bean or a web service or any darn thing. All right, and with that, we are slightly over time. We've closed the second poll. Ladies and gents, I appreciate your participation in this WebORB. Mark, thank you.
Jim, I just have one more question. I just have one more question. For those that still are a little unsure about the information that we've presented here today, if you could just submit a quick question, excuse me, to your webinar control panel, submit a quick question on what questions you might have. That might give us some ideas on what additional webinars we could present on this on the data management topic.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again. We'll see you next time. Happy coding.